I was born in 1927 in January in Mapleton, Idaho. That's often called Cub River. And I was born at home with my grandmother being the midwife. I don't remember much about my youth at that stage. We lived on a farm community and two-room schoolhouse. And we moved to Fairview, and that was also a nice farm, and we just farmed, milked cows, thinned beets, that kind of thing. Anyway, I was raised there and graduated from high school in Preston, Idaho. When I was young in high school, one of my good friends was Eldred Bodley. They were our neighbors. They just lived 100 miles away. No, they lived a mile down the road from us. And we used to ride our horses together. We'd get together and ride different places. And Eldred's father was a sheep herder. Every summer he would go out and herd sheep. We used to go to his sheep camp once in a while, and it was kind of fun because he'd cook us some lamb or something, and we would go there and watch him herd the sheep with his dogs and his horses. And I always thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be a sheep herder. And I was drafted in the Army immediately after I graduated from high school, and in the Engineer Corps, was sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where I did my training. It was in the middle of the summer, and it was hotter than blazes, and we had to do our training in that temperature. Our company were sent to Camp Beale, California, in preparation to go to the Japanese war zone. I was assigned to do some carpenter work at the storehouse of some kind. And I was building shelves there, and I didn't have them all done, so the engineering outfit I was assigned to moved on. I was sent back to Camp Shanks, New York, and sent to Germany rather than Japan. Kind of an interesting maneuver. I was left my company entirely alone. I don't know what happened to the original company. The war in Japan was still on at that time. The war in Germany had ended. But anyway, I was sent to Germany after that. On the way over, it was terrible. I went over on the Alexander. I got so sick, I wished it would have sunk. It was with the 1st Engineer Corps that arrived there after the war ended. When we first landed in Le Havre, France, we were taken off the ship and put in some trucks to be hauled into Germany, and all the little kids around there were just begging for food.
They were just left wandering, searching, looking for food, looking for their homes, looking for each other.
And we would throw them some candy or whatever we had, and they'd scramble for it. It's pretty sad when you think that was right after the war ended, and they hadn't recovered much from their devastation there. It was a rich experience to realize how blessed we are in this country. So far, we hope it stays. And we went to Stuttgart, Germany, and it was a totally destroyed city. But we were sent there to build temporary bridges and prisoner of war camps for the German prisoners. We often went out and did some research for bridges that were damaged or destroyed. And this one bridge was destroyed and we weren't aware of it. Went around a corner and the Jeep that Private Pegg was driving went into the river. He lost his life. So the rest of us came out okay. I liked military. I enjoyed what I did. I gained some good experience. I was asked to drive the GIs to their weekend where they go to celebrate and have entertainment. But I was asked to drive because I was about the only one that didn't drink, so they thought I'd bring them home safely. You don't have much interaction. The war had just ended and they were pretty mad at us and we were pretty mad at them, so there wasn't much interaction. Finally found an address for an LDS church, and so I finally found a way to get there by sign language with the German people and so on, and taking notes with them. But when I went to the service, there were almost no men there, children and old people. They were a little skittish about me being in military. I didn't have any other clothes but military clothes, but it didn't take long and they warmed up. That's the only time I was able to go to church there, and all the time in Germany. Our particular platoon was sent to Heilbronn to supervise the building of a prisoner of war camp. And so when we got to Heilbronn, we had to build a little shanty, little building for our mess hall. We would go in and eat in the mess hall and then come out, and as people do, they just throw their food away that they haven't eaten and drop it in the cans. And while we were there, the little kids would always be there by the cans, and they would pick up the food that we left. Usually we would just give it to the kids in their little tin cups or whatever. While I was in Germany, I got a chance to go to ski school where I learned to ski. They asked for volunteers for those that wanted to go to ski school, and I volunteered. One of the few times I volunteered for something I liked. It was downhill mostly and cross country, but mostly downhill. And we had Swiss trainers that trained us to ski. Oh, they just posted on the bulletin board that they were going to have about 10 of us go to ski school, and I was one of the 10 that volunteered. They never did use us after that, so I don't know why. They thought they might have to, maybe. One of the things that I did when I was in the military, I took a leave of furlough and went to Switzerland and got a chance to tour Switzerland. But there was a lot of interesting experiences there in the military. In the motor pool, we had some motorcycles, and one day I took a motorcycle and a friend of mine, and we drove the motorcycles up to Ulm, Germany. And it was interesting because Ulm, Germany was quite a famous place, and it was totally bombed out, and we saw a lot of property up there, a lot of interesting things. Had a huge cathedral. Going back home, came back on a victory ship, and it wasn't so bad. It was more pleasant. I wasn't as seasick. Came down the English Channel and saw the White Cliffs of Dover and a few things. I remember coming into New York Harbor. The first thing we saw was a big sign that said, Coca-Cola, welcome home. We even saw that before we saw the Statue of Liberty. Anyway, I arrived home in New York, and then I went to Camp Shanks, New York. And then from there I went out to Fort Lewis, Washington, where I was discharged from the military. I came home from the military and met Carol on a blind date with Devon Kofod. He was dating her twin sister.
He said, well, I've got a sister that maybe could date with, because he's just coming home from the service, and maybe I would like you to meet him. So I got ready for him to come, and I didn't go in first because I was kind of shy. So eventually I came out and met him, and we went on our date, and I always prayed that I would know the right one when they came along. I got a definite answer that he was the one for me. But I never told him because I wanted him to make the choice, you know, not me have any influence on his decision.
Eldred and I used to date together quite a bit. One time we were coming back from Malad where I was dating Carol and he had his girlfriend with him, and we went over there and went to a dance, came home. I'd left Carol, of course, in Malad, but he and his girlfriend were sitting in the back seat. On our way home, I fell asleep driving the car and hit a abutment, and the car flipped over into a creek. Eldred was in such a way that he couldn't move, so I was able to get out of the car and to help him out on the bank. His girlfriend had been thrown out of the car onto the bank. We were all saved, but Eldred always had back trouble after that because he'd been hurt pretty badly. It was down over an embankment and cars kept passing by there and they couldn't see us. Finally, I got able to get up to the top of the bank and hail down a car to stop us. And that was kind of a bad deal. Wrecked my dad's car. First thing I thought about when I was flying through the air there, I was thinking, oh boy, here's my dad's car's wrecked. Funny what you think about in situations like that. Then I went on a mission to East Central States Mission, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia. That was a choice experience because I worked in several different cities. One of the main cities, I guess, that I had the best luck as a missionary was in Moorhead, Kentucky. My companion and I lived with a family in a separate room that they had for us, and she was a Baptist, a very strong Baptist, and her 3 girls and her husband were LDS, and they were wonderful people. She was a wonderful woman. Her mother made sure that she wouldn't listen to us, tell her about the church. But we lived there with them for a few months, and finally, after a period of time, she started to ask me questions, and I answered her questions, and I didn't try to pressure her at all. Before we left Moorhead, Kentucky, we baptized her, and we baptized her father-in-law. His name was James Ott. He was a local jeweler. He'd been taught numerous times with missionaries. His wife was a member. Anyway, James Ott joined the church, and one of their sons' wife joined the church. So we had 3 good baptisms in Moorhead, Kentucky. While we were there, we were invited to present something about the Mormon church at the Moorhead State College. And that was an interesting experience as well. We spent about 2 hours being interviewed and presenting our thoughts there on that radio station. Had a good experience also in Harriman, Tennessee. Elder Richards and I got off the bus and had nowhere to go. So we picked up a newspaper, local newspaper, and found an address that they offered to rent an apartment. We went to that particular street, which is a nice street in a nice area, and we asked the lady at the door, she was a widow, and if we could rent the house or rent the apartment. She wanted to know who we were. We were told her we were missionaries, and she didn't particularly want to rent to us. She'd heard a lot of bad things about the Mormons, and so we made an agreement with her that if we would pay her a month's rent, anytime she wanted us to move, we would, and she could keep the month's rent. So after the month, she was very happy with us, and she rented it to us. And her name was Alice Lane. We became good friends. She was an older lady, and she didn't necessarily want to learn much about the gospel, but she was a sweet lady. And when we left, she had to give us a big hug and want us to come back and see her again.
Truman came on a whistle-stop tour when he was running for president. He stopped at that town where we were, and we were able to see him at least, and the crowd that was there. And he gave a speech there trying to convince people to vote for him, obviously, and it was only about 10 minutes, and he was gone again.
In Harriman, Tennessee, we were tracting one day, and we came upon two ladies sitting in a wheelchair outside on the front porch, and one was young and one was older, and the younger one was Annette Pierce, and she was in high school, senior in high school. She was also a Baptist Sunday school teacher, and we taught them, and we taught her primarily. But Sister Harris was the other person. She listened and she didn't participate too much. But anyway, we ended up leaving, being transferred away from Harriman. I corresponded with them, mainly with Annette Pierce. She would ask me questions and I'd write her a letter and answer her questions. And finally, toward the end of my mission, she was willing to be baptized, wanted to be baptized. So we were given permission to go down there to baptize her and Harris, Sister Harris. We baptized them both. It so happens that, 50 years later, we were in St. George, and we were going to church with Carol's aunt. We went to the gospel doctrine class, and the fellow in the seat in front of us, he asked me who I was. And he said, do you know who's teaching the class? And I said, no, I don't. He says, it's Annette Pierce, the gal I had baptized when she was a senior in high school, clear back in Harriman, Tennessee. And it was kind of interesting. He wrote an article in the Church News that I have a copy of.
We were married in Logan Temple. We had a reception. We went on our honeymoon to Mount Hood, Oregon.
When I came from on mission and we decided to get married, the Desert News put out a little advertisement that if someone has a good experience, we're willing to give them a vacation. So I wrote in and said, well, I just got home from a mission, I'm getting married, and I would love to have this vacation for a honeymoon, something like that. And my brother, who we lived in the neighborhood with, he had subscribed to the Desert News. You had to subscribe in order to be eligible for the benefit. So I won. We were given a week at Mount Hood in Oregon. We didn't stay there a whole week because there was nothing to do. At the time, I had an old Chevrolet but my brother had just bought a new Hudson, and he insisted that we take his new Hudson on our honeymoon. My brother John was always very generous. We worked for him for a while after we got married. We lived in a kind of a small trailer house on his farm, and it was our first home after we got married. Worked for him for a while, and then finally I went to work with my dad on the farm. Now for my occupation, I went to school first at Utah State Agricultural College. It's now known as Utah State University. I went there for a quarter, and then I was going to continue to go, but my father had a serious accident, and I had to stop school and operate the farm. He wasn't able to do that, and so I spent the next year or two running the farm. And after that, Carol and I decided that we'd move to Denver and I would enroll in school in the American Academy. That was a watchmaker's school. After I graduated from school in the American Academy in Denver, I took a job in Cheyenne, Wyoming in a jewelry store, repairing watches for the jeweler. I later moved to Pocatello, Idaho, and I worked for Kugler's Jewelers. I was the principal watchmaker for him. He had two watchmakers. He was a major jeweler in Idaho Falls. I worked there as a watchmaker for some time. And then one day I was asked to speak in sacrament meeting, and the fellow came up to me after and he invited me to talk to him about going into insurance business with Prudential Insurance Company. He persuaded me to leave the jewelry business and go into the insurance business. So I worked in the insurance business for about 7 years. During that time I earned many good trips, usually was one of the better producers in the area. I was promoted to staff manager in the Pocatello area, where I controlled the activities of Prudential in Pocatello. We had 7 salesmen. We had a pretty good group. I decided to resign from there after my cousin Nolan invited me to go to Fresno and go into the tire business with him. And so I did that. Well, it was hard there for a while. I tell you that starting a new business in a place that we didn't know wasn't easy. We lived pretty frugally. We hardly could take any salary for a while. Anyway, we made the business prosper. Later, the state were building a freeway around Fresno, the Beltway. They took the property that we were leasing. We weren't compensated for that because the landlord was. So I decided to go out of the tire business then and start to work for Parker Realty, selling real estate. Later I transferred to another broker there, Watson Realty. Well, we were in Fresno for a while renting, and then we finally decided we wanted to buy a house, so we found this home in Fresno that had a nice swimming pool, fairly small home, and that's where our kids learned to swim. Deanne was born while we were in Fresno, and she was a long-awaited girl. We waited 9 years finally to get her. She was a great blessing to us. We decided after a while to have her take swimming lessons, so if she fell in, she could get back out. So she took swimming lessons for a while until she got pretty proficient at swimming. When she was very little, it was hard to watch the lady that was teaching her to swim because she would sit her out a ways from her and she'd back up and then she would,
Go down crying.
yeah, she'd go down crying into the water. But she taught her how to swim, and that was pretty good. It was kind of fun there. We added to the house later. My dad came down and helped us build a big addition to that house. He was a builder, and yeah, we still love that house. It was a little section in Fresno that was still in the county. It was a pleasant place to live. When we were in Fresno, we would go to Yosemite to conduct services. It was pretty helpful to members of the church that were visiting there as tourists. And this wasn't too often. We only did that about 4 or 5 times. Another thing we did when we were in Fresno, I had a third interest in an airplane, and we used to fly quite a bit to Arizona or to Utah. We'd fly up here for general conference, or we'd fly to Logan to see my parents. And I enjoyed the flying part. I remember one time I was gonna fly Grandpa Crowther down to Arizona. Decided we'd have to land at Flagstaff because of the weather. And the wind was blowing pretty hard, so we had to land there with a crosswind. And that's a little tricky because you have to crab the airplane. By crabbing it would mean that you'd have to come in on a slope, and then just before you hit the ground, you'd straighten it up. We enjoyed the airplane. I'd like to go flying again, but I guess I'm too old. When we moved from Fresno, I had to sell my interest in the airplane. We had friends were the Jepsons. He was a officer at the bank. He called me one day and he said, "I've got this Cadillac that we had to take back. It's a good car." He says, "I can make you a good buy on that if you want it." So we bought that Cadillac. Yeah, we had a lot of good friends. The Ames, I was a counselor to Bishop Ames. We did things together. He was a pilot also, and we sometimes would fly together in different places. Then we decided we wanted to move back to Utah, so I told Carol that I would go there and take the real estate exams. If I passed them, we'd move. If I didn't pass, we'd stay there. I happened to pass them. We moved to Orem and bought a house, unfinished basement. I opened my own business on a card table and an extension phone in the basement. Started to sell real estate there. Fortunately, my brother-in-law was a contractor, and I was able to help him a little bit sell some of his products. We later rented a place on State Street in Orem, and later we bought the property, and later we increased the size of the property. So I was pretty successful as a real estate broker. A couple of years I was chosen the Realtor of the Year, and then I served one period of time as the president of the Realty Board for Utah County. Anyway, I decided to quit the business. Everyone was surprised. It was a pretty prosperous business, and I wonder sometimes how come I was so stupid to do that. But anyway, I sold the real estate business and moved to Missouri, where many of our friends from Fresno lived. And we went out to visit them, and one of them showed us a piece of property, 70 acres of beautiful farmland, and so we decided to buy the farm and move to Missouri. In Missouri, I was almost immediately made a member of the High Council. And then within a couple of years, Elder McConkey came out to change the stake presidency, and I was selected to be the stake president at that time. And I served there as a stake president until we moved away from Missouri back to Utah, about 7 years. I enjoyed that, being a stake president. It was really time-consuming. We had
Wards or branches in Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas. And they were pretty scattered. I had a lot of travel to do.
We had a distance of about 200 miles one way and about 150 miles the other way, so I did a lot of travel. But I enjoyed that. I got to love the people. Elder McConkey said, there's one thing you've got to do. You've got to get the finances straightened out in this stake. It was in bad shape. They owed money on everything. They owed money to the church on their welfare assessment. They owed money on 2 buildings that they had built that hadn't been paid for, running in the deficit on their budget. Anyway, it was kind of a mess. So he told me I needed to straighten that out. Well, I did. I straightened it out. We got all our debts paid. We even made a contribution to the Dallas Temple. We were assigned a $15,000 assessment for the Dallas Temple, and we were able to meet that within a couple of weeks. I think I know how to manage money, so that probably was the reason I was sent there, maybe to Missouri, I don't know. But my time as a stake president, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the ward conferences. I enjoyed the stake conferences. I had a chance to speak, of course, often, as you would imagine, to all the firesides and stake conferences, ward conferences, and so on. Had a chance to meet many of the general authorities that would come out to our stake conference.
Usually they would stay in our home Saturday night, then go back to the Joplin Stake Center on Sunday morning. It was about a distance of somewhere 35, 40 miles from my home to the stake center. Some of these brethren were really interesting to be so personally acquainted with them, and we had a nice bedroom for them, and always got them up early and got breakfast for them, then we'd go off to the stake center. I can't think of this one. The general authority was kind of humorous, and Deanne, and he'd sit in the back seat of the car as we traveled from the Joplin Stake Center to home, and he was kidding with Deanne all the time. It was really a lot of fun. I think she really enjoyed that.
I had a lot of fun there. I raised quarter horses, and I had a couple of quarter horses, and I'd get a colt about every year. Had about 14 or 15 head of beef cattle, and I had little calves every spring, and it was fun. I really enjoyed that. Even to this day, I miss that. So I guess at heart, I'm a farm boy.
I bought a boat when I was in Missouri, and it was a pretty good boat. I used to go water skiing quite often with taking some friends. Deanne became a pretty good water skier. At that time, she was in high school. There were some really nice lakes in that area of Missouri and Oklahoma and Arkansas. One of the lakes in Arkansas was a beautiful lake. We had a good time. A few years ago, a tornado hit Pierce City, which was the city next to us. It was probably maybe 5 miles from us. But this was after we came home, and it totally destroyed Pierce City.
At least 20 people are feared dead throughout southwest Missouri. One of the hardest hit areas is in Pierce City in Lawrence County. Last night's twisters left that community's downtown in ruins. Keller 10's Chris Goodman just returned from Pierce City, and Chris, I understand that town is just pretty much devastated.
Oh, you name it, the post office, a furniture store, bank, convenience store, an insurance company, all either badly damaged or destroyed, and even worse, some of those trying to take refuge from the destruction killed.
Fortunately, it didn't hit into Monette, which is where we lived, which was the next door city. Later, a tornado hit Joplin.
20 meters to F5, to F5 going through the city. Feel it. F5, Captain. Oh my God.
And destroyed the stake center there that I was familiar with, and the high school across the street from the stake center.
Dylan is gone. Dylan is gone.
We didn't go back to see that. We might still go back and see that. They've rebuilt that now. We moved back to Utah, sold a nice farm to Dr. Osino. It hurt. I didn't like to sell the farm, but all of our kids lived out here, and we had to go back and forth quite often. When we decided to come back from Missouri, we moved into the same ward that we had left from years before. I bought a twin home, and we lived there for a while, and then kind of got tired of the twin home, so we bought a residence, a regular home, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. Had a nice garden spot. We built a large garage for our motorhome and had a place for my boat. We had a swimming pool in that home that we bought. The kids usually liked to swim in it, and we had neighbors that would come over and swim in it. It was a good pool. But when the kids started leaving home, getting married and so on, we decided we'd fill it in. There were too many trees around, and it was always a difficult thing to keep the thing clean. And I didn't use it that much, so we filled it in and planted some fruit trees in its place. And it was a nice home, and we really enjoyed living there until we decided to move to the home where we are now, which is in American Fork. We don't have to do any yard work. When I was in business here, in the real estate business, I knew quite a few other businessmen, and we used to get together for breakfast once a week. And one of them said, "Hey, let's go to Alaska." So we all decided to take a trip to Alaska on a fishing trip. We went up the Kenai River in Alaska, and we caught a lot of nice fish. Other things that we went on our motorhome, we used to go to Yuma almost every year with Ray and Pauline in their motorhome, and we would go to Yuma and spend a week, and then we'd go over to Casa Grande, Arizona for a week. And that was always a great fun. We went on several trips with our motorhome. I've had a lot of experiences in the church. I've served as a Sunday school president. Most of my time here has been teaching positions. I was on the stake high council of the BYU 4th stake, but I worked as a high counselor there in that stake for some time. During that time, I was also called to be the counselor to the president of the BYU mission. I don't know if they still have a BYU mission, but at that time they had a BYU mission. I was called to be the counselor to the president president then was Dick Richards. I've been a bishop a couple of times, and I think on 4 or 5 high councils. I've been a sealer in the temple. I was called to be the temple counselor to President Anderson to the Provo Temple. Yeah, I was kind of surprised at that because I didn't know him, he didn't know me. He came to the temple one day with the president he was going to replace, and he wanted to interview some of the people that worked in the temple. And he talked with me a little bit. I didn't hear any more from him until one day President Monson, who was then a member of the 12 Apostles, well, he called on the phone and Carol answered the phone. And she brought the phone to me and he said, "This has been Elder Monson." And I said, "Oh, well, how are you?" Anyway, we talked for minutes and he called me to be a counselor to the temple president right on the phone. It was kind of a nice experience. So we worked in the temple presidency for 3 years. That's the time that they have. And that was a rich experience also. Although it was busy, we were in the temple every day that it was open for 3 years. When I was made in the temple presidency, they made me a sealer. President Faust gave me that authority. So I sealed in the Provo Temple, and then I sealed in the American Fork Temple. Then later I was called to as a sealer in the Washington, D.C. Temple, which was a nice experience. We look back on our life and we think that it just seems to me like the Lord guided us in the things we had to do. I look back now and I think it was kind of stupid to sell a good, prosperous business and move back in a country that I didn't know anything about and buy a farm. It just didn't make any sense to me as I look back on it now. But maybe the Lord has a purpose for us. Anyway, here I am, 86 years old, and just biding my time. I can say that the Lord's been good to me, and it's because I've tried to live right, and I know the church is true, so I try to live the way the church taught us to live. I think I've been inspired to, a lot of times, to do things that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise done, or avoid doing things that I knew I shouldn't have been doing. It's a matter of faith and testimony that you have to expect blessings if you live for them. Mom passed away about 2.5 years ago. I miss her terribly, and we had a good life together. She was very supportive in all the things we wanted to do, and so I'm looking forward to reunion again. It'll last forever. I'm looking forward to that union. I don't know whether she is or not. Our life has been well. You know, we've enjoyed it all.
It's a Saturday's night at the World. I am thinking about a girl and how useless to search it becomes when you seek all the answers in one. But her voice seemed to answer the echoing silence from yesterday's asking and waiting and listening for something resembling a song to be sung back to me. It's a Saturday's night at the World. I am thinking about a girl and how useless to search it becomes when you seek all the answers in one. And her eyes seemed quicksilver, reflecting the prisms I kindle, uneclipsed by the darkness of lovings, mirages that swindle the heart with the shadows of we. and her love seemed to offer a sojourn from endless beginnings. So I went spinning into her to love her, but found her one answer for loving and losing the same. It's a Saturday's night at the World. I am thinking about a girl, and how useless to search it becomes when you seek all the answers in one.